Buildings are made of breath, not just concrete. Most developers never understand that. They talk about skyline impact, glass reflectivity, rental yield per square foot. They talk about height like it's power. But breath, that invisible exchange between pressure and temperature, is what keeps a structure alive. For 730 days, that belief governed my life. My name is Arya Raman, and at 24, I thought I was designing the future. The Vane Eco-Tower wasn't just another high-rise proposal. It was a 60-story experiment in passive environmental control. Instead of oversized chillers and mechanical dependency, I designed vertical ventilation shafts calibrated through computational fluid dynamics modeling. Every intake louver was angled to respond to seasonal wind patterns. Every core cavity dimension was calculated to maintain thermal buoyancy. Heat rises, cool air sinks. If you respect that equation, a building can regulate itself. Those 2 years were measured in simulations. The office at midnight felt like a sealed submarine. The hum of server racks filled the background like distant machinery. Blue monitor light washed over drafting tables, scattered with half-rolled blueprints. The smell of stale coffee lingered in paper cups forgotten beside keyboards. I remember watching airflow vectors in red and blue crawl across my screen at 2:17 a.m. I adjusted differential pressure coefficients by decimals. I reran models after discovering minor turbulence around level 38 caused by a miscalculated shaft taper. My coworkers thought I was obsessive. Maybe I was, but obsession is just focus without apology. Some nights the building refused to stabilize. Thermal gradients spiked beyond acceptable thresholds. Other nights, something clicked, a smooth laminar column rising through the core, pulling fresh air from the lower facade panels without mechanical assistance. When it finally worked, when internal temperature variance dropped below ±1.5 degrees F across all 60 floors, I felt like I had coaxed life into steel. Julian Vane began appearing more often after that. He moved quietly for a man with that much authority. Tailored suit, cufflinks catching monitor light, sandalwood cologne mixing with the scent of warm electronics. "You're still here?" he asked one night around 1 in the morning. "I'm refining the intake velocity for winter conditions." He leaned over my shoulder, studying the screen. "You know most firms would outsource this modeling. I don't trust outsourcing for something this sensitive," he smiled. "That's why you're different." Different, he pulled up a chair. "Arya," he said softly, "this tower is going to change how people think about sustainability, but vision needs a name attached to it. Investors need something solid." "I know," I replied, eyes still on the simulation. "They trust my brand, my track record." I turned toward him slightly. "It's our work." "Of course it is," he said quickly, "but the world doesn't invest in junior architects, they invest in leadership." It sounded reasonable, strategic. He stayed another hour, asking questions about stack effect efficiency ratios, nodding thoughtfully as I explained. "You're the mind behind this," he told me before leaving. "Don't ever doubt that." I didn't. The press conference was held in a downtown ballroom with ceilings high enough to swallow applause. White stage lights bounced off polished marble floors. Rows of investors sat in velvet-backed chairs that felt too soft, too expensive. The air carried expensive perfume and the faint metallic scent of chilled champagne. I wore a charcoal suit I could barely afford. My hands trembled against the armrests. Julian stepped onto the stage, confident and polished. The LED screen behind him illuminated airflow diagrams, my airflow diagrams. He spoke about thermal differentials and pressure stabilization like he'd lived inside the math. Applause rose in waves. Then the final slide appeared. Lead architect and visionary, Julian Vane. I waited. My name didn't follow, the slide didn't change. He continued speaking, thanking investors, discussing his sleepless nights. The applause became a physical force. It felt like standing too close to machinery. My ears rang. I stared at the screen, expecting correction, expecting acknowledgement. Nothing. The room smelled heavier suddenly. The velvet beneath my palms felt abrasive. My chest tightened in slow motion. Backstage, cables hung like black vines behind the curtains. The noise of celebration echoed faintly from the hall. "My name wasn't there," I said when I found him. He didn't look surprised. "Optics matter," Julian replied evenly. "I built the system, and you were paid to build it. That's not what we discussed." He took a measured sip of champagne. "Arya, branding is strategy. Investors back stability, they don't back potential. You told me, I told you this was important work, and it is." He leaned closer. "The files have been consolidated. The server's been cleaned up. Let's not make this emotional. Cleaned up. You removed my authorship. I protected the project. 2 days later, HR called it restructuring. By Friday, my badge stopped working. Interviews I had lined up were canceled without explanation. Calls went unanswered. Julian hadn't just taken credit, he had removed my credibility. Erasure doesn't happen loudly. It happens in quiet rooms with polite smiles. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt the building breathing without me. For the next 2 years, I didn't disappear dramatically. I simply sank. The city archive office sat behind the courthouse like an afterthought, a concrete block with narrow windows that never opened. My badge got me through a side door, down a stairwell that smelled of damp stone, and into the basement where the city stored what it didn't want to think about. The lights buzzed overhead, fluorescent tubes with a blue-white tone that made everyone look tired. Some flickered at random. The air was thick with old glue, aging cardboard, and paper that had been handled by too many indifferent hands. Dust lived everywhere, on metal shelving along file drawers in the weave of my sleeves by mid-shift. My title was Records Processing Associate. My work was repetition. Scan, log, stamp, refile. I sat at a steel desk, beside a high-speed scanner that thumped and hissed. Permits from the 70s, renovation notices from the 90s. Inspection forms for buildings that no longer existed. Each one passed through my hands, and into a database no one visited unless something went wrong. No one asked what I used to do. Nobody wanted a story down here. They wanted a quota. Down here, time felt measured in paper cuts and rubber stamp clicks. I kept my head down, but my mind kept drafting sections, vents, and pressure maps I couldn't submit anymore. But every morning on the bus ride in, the skyline reminded me I was still alive. Between traffic lights and low rooftops, the Vane Eco-Tower rose like a clean blade of glass. I could pick out my own decisions from a distance. The shading fins that reduced heat gain, the intake bands at the lower podium, the subtle taper I had insisted on to stabilize pressure. That building should have been a line on my resume. Instead, it was a bruise in the sky. Some days I stared at it until my eyes watered, then forced myself to look away before anyone noticed. Other days I pretended it wasn't there and let the bus carry me underground like a confession. I told myself I was done, that I'd survive by shrinking. Then one Tuesday, it rained hard enough to make the city sound hollow. A pallet of boxes arrived from municipal planning, their cardboard soft at the corners, the labels smeared. My supervisor said, "These need to be scanned today," and dropped the top folder on my desk. Vane Eco-Tower, permit revisions. My fingers went still. I pulled the file closer slowly. The folder was heavy, thick with amendments and stamps. The paper inside was colder than I expected, slightly damp at the edges, and it smelled like wet ink and dust. I flipped through elevator inspections, fire sign-offs, landscape adjustments. Routine, noise. Then I saw a red stamp, urgent. Permit revision 47B. The page was cream stock, crisp despite the damp, and my thumb caught the faint texture of the seal pressed into the corner. Foundation and core material substitution. Reason, budget optimization. My heartbeat got loud in my ears. I read the material line once, then again. Low-grade recycled alloy blend. It was the kind of substitution that looks harmless to someone who thinks metal is just metal. But my passive system had been calibrated around thermal stability. The alloy I specified wasn't about prestige. It was about predictable thermal conductivity and expansion behavior. about keeping the core's temperature swing within a narrow band, so the stack effect stayed smooth instead of turbulent. Change that alloy and the core heats too fast in sun, cools too quickly at night. That creates thermal spikes, hot plugs and cold drops inside the vertical shafts. Pressure zones destabilize. The breathing cycle stutters. To compensate, mechanical systems kick in more often, quietly burning energy behind a marketing story that promised nature would do the work. Julian hadn't just stolen my credit, he had broken my physics. I sat there with the permit in my hands, face calm, stomach turning. Around me, coworkers kept moving, unaware that a lie had just surfaced in ink and paper. By the time I clocked out, the rain had slowed to a mist. I rode home with the permit's number repeating in my head like a code. At my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I went straight to my closet and knelt on the floor. I pulled out a shoebox buried under old notebooks and rolled drawings. My fingers found the small, black external hard drive I'd hidden years ago because I never trusted company servers. When I plugged it in, a blue indicator blinked once, then steadied like a pulse. Folders loaded on my screen, original models, SIM logs, email exports. My name wasn't gone. It was waiting. Archives don't forget. They just wait for the right hands to open the box. I didn't go to a lawyer. Lawyers negotiate. They settle. They measure truth in billable hours and probability charts. Julian had built an empire on optics and controlled narratives. If I walked into a courtroom alone, I would become a disgruntled former employee before the first motion was filed. What I had wasn't a lawsuit. It was leverage. Marcus Thorne had written about the Vane Eco-Tower the year it opened. He praised its passive ventilation system in technical detail, rare for a journalist. He understood airflow modeling. He understood thermal behavior. And more importantly, he understood fraud disguised as innovation. The first email I sent him was short. Subject: Permit Revision 47B Body. You praised the airflow model of Vane Eco-Tower. Cross-reference its certification specs with Municipal Permit 47B. Compare the specified alloy with the substituted blend. The numbers won't match. I didn't sign my name. 3 days passed without a response. Every afternoon in the archive basement, the fluorescent lights flickered at exactly 3:17 p.m. I began to dread that minute. My heart would jump, thinking the building had found me, thinking Julian's people had traced something back. On the 4th day, an encrypted reply arrived. Who is this? No accusation, no dismissal. Just curiosity. I sent him a redacted comparison sheet, thermal conductivity values, expansion coefficients, load recalibration notes. I explained how the alloy substitution would destabilize the stack effect during peak solar exposure. The building was designed as a pressure-regulated chimney, I wrote. With this substitution, it behaves like an insulated container. Mechanical intervention compensates for what physics should handle. His reply came faster this time. If this is accurate, the certification process was misrepresented. I need full simulation logs. That was the first moment I hesitated. Sending him the logs meant revealing authorship. It meant stepping out of invisibility. It meant risking Julian's retaliation again. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes before typing my name. Arya Raman. The reply didn't come for 2 hours. When it did, it read, "Were you on the original design team?" I answered with timestamps, emails, draft exports, archived CFD models with my embedded user ID. We began exchanging data nightly. I rebuilt portions of the airflow simulation on my laptop, verifying deviations under the substituted alloy's properties. Marcus cross-checked my work with independent engineers. He didn't trust me blindly, which I respected. Meanwhile, Julian was everywhere. One night I watched him on a late-night business talk show. He stood in the tower lobby, polished marble gleaming behind him. "We didn't just construct a building," he said smoothly. "We engineered a new standard for sustainable living." I leaned forward on my couch, staring at the background. I recognized the sensor panel behind him, one of the humidity override systems installed after opening. It wasn't part of my design. It glowed faintly red. He was selling the illusion of breath while the building quietly struggled. Marcus called me for the first time that week. His voice was low, steady. "I've verified the substitution. The energy usage data doesn't match the public sustainability report. Either someone falsified the performance claims or the building is compensating." "It's compensating," I said. "It has to." There was a pause. "If I publish this," he continued, "it won't just embarrass him. It will trigger regulatory audits. I know, and you will be visible." I thought about the basement, the dust, the flickering lights, the years of silence. "I'm done being invisible." The article went live at 9:02 a.m. on a Wednesday. The green lie, inside the Vane Eco-Tower's hidden compromise. Marcus laid out the evidence methodically. No theatrics. Just data, permit 47B alloy substitution, thermal deviation models, a side-by-side comparison of projected versus actual energy performance. My name appeared midway through the piece. Arya Raman, the original airflow systems designer, provided archived simulation logs demonstrating the material inconsistency. At 9:15. My archive office supervisor walked past my desk holding her phone. "Have you seen this?" she asked another clerk. "Vane Developments is under audit." Someone else pulled up the article. The scanner beside me kept thumping. By noon, Vane Developments stock had dropped 12%. By 2, regulatory agencies announced a performance review. Julian appeared in a press statement calling the article a technical misunderstanding. He described me as a former employee with incomplete context. Incomplete context. I sat beneath buzzing lights, scanning permits from 1983 while the world debated my data. Nobody in the basement looked at me differently. To them, I was still the quiet clerk who logged documents efficiently, and I preferred it that way, because the article wasn't the final move, it was the opening gambit. That evening, I received an email from Vane Developments, event coordinator. Subject, 5th Anniversary Gala, updated guest list apparently. In the chaos of press fallout and public relations recalibration, my name had been added to the investor list. Perhaps someone believed inclusion looked strategic. Perhaps they thought proximity meant control, or perhaps Julian wanted to face me on his terms. I read the invitation twice. Black tie, 7 p.m. Main ballroom. I closed my laptop slowly. If the building was going to breathe again, it would have to happen in front of everyone who believed his version of the story. And this time, I would not sit in the front row waiting for a slide to change. I would control the screen. The Vane Eco-Tower glowed emerald that night. From the outside, it looked immaculate. Glass panels polished, LED uplighting washing the facade in calculated elegance. Valets in black gloves opened doors for investors stepping out of imported sedans. The air smelled faintly of rain and cologne. Inside, the lobby had been transformed into a performance. Champagne flowed from silver trays. A quartet played restrained jazz near the central atrium. Conversations floated upward toward the 60-story core I once calibrated by decimal points. I paused at the entrance long enough to feel the weight of the building again. The floor beneath my heels was limestone imported from Italy. I remembered reviewing that invoice. I remembered arguing for domestic stone to lower embodied carbon. I remembered losing that argument. Every step I took across that lobby felt deliberate, not dramatic, just measured. Heads turned slowly. Whispers formed in the space between breaths. Some recognized me from the article photo. Others recognized the tension. Julian stood near the stage, surrounded by board members and investors. He wore confidence like armor, but it sat differently now, less fluid, more forced. When he saw me, something flickered across his face. Not anger, not fear, calculation. He dismissed the person he was speaking to and approached. "Arya," he said quietly, "you made your point. There's no need for spectacle." "Sustainability is not spectacle," I replied. His jaw tightened. "This is a celebration." "Of what?" The music continued playing behind us, but the room had grown quieter. Conversations slowed. People sensed confrontation the way animals sense pressure shifts. "You could have handled this privately," he said. "I tried," I answered. His eyes sharpened. "You've damaged investor confidence. You damaged physics." He exhaled through his nose, stepping closer. "You're emotional." I held his gaze. "Science doesn't belong to marketing." That sentence carried. The music faltered. The event coordinator approached hesitantly. "Mr. Vane, it's time for your speech." He straightened his jacket and walked toward the stage. I followed. When he began speaking, his voice projected smoothly across the ballroom. "Tonight marks 5 years of innovation, 5 years of commitment to sustainability." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone near the front whispered, "That's her." Julian continued, ignoring it. "As recent discussions have shown, innovation invites scrutiny." I stepped onto the stage. The technician at the control panel looked uncertain. I handed him a small drive. "Display this," I said quietly. Julian turned mid-sentence. "This is inappropriate," he hissed. "No," I said calmly. "This is data." The main screen behind us shifted. A live thermal map of the tower's core appeared, real-time sensor feed. Red turbulence zones pulsed visibly between floors 28 and 36. Investors leaned forward. "What is that?" someone asked. I took the microphone. "My name is Arya Raman. I designed the original passive airflow system for this building." Julian tried to interrupt. "Former employee." "I designed it," I repeated, "and the system worked." Under the specified alloy. The screen shifted to a side-by-side comparison, original material versus substituted blend, thermal conductivity values, energy load graphs, performance deviation percentages. "Permit revision 47B authorized a material substitution," I said. "That substitution altered thermal stability within the core. The stack effect destabilizes under peak solar load. Mechanical systems compensate at a 40% higher energy rate than certified." The room was silent. A board member near the front adjusted his glasses. "Is that verified?" "Yes," I answered. "Independent audits confirm it." Julian stepped toward me, voice raised but controlled. "You're misrepresenting technical nuance." "Then explain it," I said, stepping aside slightly. "Explain why the humidity override sensors behind you are active during a supposed passive cycle." All eyes turned to the faint red indicator lights near the atrium ceiling. Julian's composure cracked, not dramatically but visibly. A bead of sweat traced his temple. "It was a temporary calibration," he began. "For 5 years," an investor called out. Whispers swelled into pointed conversations. Stock values, certification risk, legal exposure. Julian reached for the microphone again. "This building is safe." "I never said it wasn't," I replied. "I said it isn't what you promised." The distinction mattered. I clicked once more. The final slide displayed archived CFD simulations timestamped 2 years prior, my name embedded in the metadata. "I never asked for a stage," I said. "I asked for integrity." The board members were no longer looking at me. They were looking at him. Security approached quietly, not as an arrest, not as drama. As protocol, Julian stood rigid, eyes fixed forward. The man who once told me optics mattered now faced a room full of investors recalculating their trust. As he stepped down from the stage, someone near the back said, "She's right." It wasn't applause, it was acknowledgement, and that carried further than noise ever could. Julian's removal was not dramatic. There were no flashing cameras, no shouting headlines that night. The board convened privately. By morning, he was no longer CEO. The building, however, remained. And buildings do not care about pride. They care about physics. 2 weeks later, I received a formal invitation, not to a gala, not to a press conference, but to a board meeting. They didn't offer apologies. They offered responsibility. Sustainability director, full authority over performance recalibration and structural correction. I walked back into the tower on a gray Monday morning. The lobby felt different without the artificial glow of celebration. The marble still gleamed, but the air felt heavy, mechanical systems humming quietly behind walls to compensate for thermal instability. I stepped into the elevator and watched the numbers climb. When the doors opened to the executive floor, I was greeted by the office Julian once occupied. Glass walls, city skyline, a desk positioned to face both. I stood there for a long moment before sitting in his chair. It felt smaller than I expected. The irony wasn't loud. It was precise. The first 6 weeks were diagnostics. We installed high-resolution thermal sensors along the central shaft. We recalibrated pressure differentials across intake louvers. I brought in metallurgical engineers to analyze reinforcement strategies for the substituted alloy. We couldn't replace the entire core. That would require dismantling 60 floors. But we could mitigate. We installed supplementary thermal dampening sleeves around critical vertical sections to stabilize heat transfer rates. We adjusted facade shading algorithms to reduce peak solar gain by 12%. We redesigned intake modulation cycles to counter turbulence during rapid temperature swings. The mechanical systems were reprogrammed, not to compensate, but to assist only when thresholds exceeded natural limits. Slowly, the building began to behave the way it was originally designed to. The first time the airflow graphs stabilized without mechanical override, I felt the same quiet satisfaction I had felt at 24, staring at a glowing screen at 2:17 a.m. Except this time, no one could delete it. The final audit report arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Energy efficiency within projected parameters. Certification reinstated under revised documentation. Performance restored. A week later, facilities management installed a small gold plate near the elevator bank in the lobby. Not large, not dramatic. Original concept and sustainability vision, Arya Raman. I stood in front of it after hours when the building was quiet. Office workers had gone home. Cleaning crews moved softly in distant corridors. The intake vents shifted slightly as evening air cooled. The core adjusted. The building exhaled. Legacy is often misunderstood. People think it's about visibility. About headlines and speeches and stages. It is. Legacy is engineered. It is drafted in silence, calculated in decimals, and built to withstand substitution. Julian believed reputation was architecture. He was wrong. Reputation is glass, structure is steel, and truth is pressure. Applied correctly, it reshapes everything. I didn't sue for money. I didn't destroy the tower, I restored it. Because revenge isn't noise, it's correction. And correction lasts longer than applause. If you've ever been erased, document yourself. If you've ever been dismissed, keep your drafts. Because legacy isn't given, it's engineered.